To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Jonathan Hess stood in his workshop, the scent of sawdust and varnish filling his nostrils as he put the finishing touches on a custom dining table. At 42, he had built Hess Custom Furniture from nothing into one of the most respected woodworking businesses in Millbrook County. His calloused hands, steady from years of precision work, reflected the same methodical approach he brought to everything in life. "Dad, it's gorgeous." Emma Hess bounced into the workshop, her auburn hair catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. At 16, she had inherited her father's keen eye for detail and her mother's infectious enthusiasm. "Mrs. Patterson is going to love it." Jonathan smiled, setting down his sandpaper. Emma was the light of his world, honor roll student, captain of the debate team, and volunteer at the local animal shelter. She had been accepted early admission to Columbia University for journalism, a dream she'd nurtured since she was 12 years old writing for the school newspaper. "Your mother called," Emma continued, leaning against his workbench. "Dinner's ready. And she said something about your favorite dessert if you stop being a perfectionist and come inside." Michelle Hess appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. After 18 years of marriage, she still made Jonathan's heart skip a beat. Her warm brown eyes crinkled with the same humor that had captivated him in college. "I said no such thing. I said the pot roast is getting cold and your daughter is starving." "I'm always starving," Emma protested. "It's called being a teenager." The family walked toward their modest two-story home, situated on 5 acres just outside Millbrook's town limits. Jonathan had built the house himself, every beam and board chosen with care. It wasn't the largest home in the county, but it was filled with love, laughter, and the satisfied exhaustion that came from honest work. Over dinner, Emma excitedly discussed her upcoming internship at the Millbrook Gazette. "Mr. Patterson said I might get to cover the town council meetings this summer. It's not exactly investigative journalism, but it's a start." "Be careful what you dig up in this town," Michelle warned playfully. "Your father and I have been here our whole lives, and some stones are better left unturned." Jonathan had grown up in Millbrook, the son of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. He'd earned a full scholarship to state, where he met Michelle in their sophomore English class. They'd returned home after graduation, Jonathan learning the furniture trade from old Pete Kowalski before starting his own business. It was a simple life, but it was theirs. "Speaking of digging," Jonathan said, "I heard Gregory Garrison's running for another term as mayor." Michelle rolled her eyes. 20 years of that man is enough. The Garrison family has run this town like their personal kingdom for 3 generations. "Carlton Garrison was in my AP history class before he dropped out," Emma added. "Total waste of space. Daddy's money can't buy you a brain, apparently." Jonathan frowned. He'd heard stories about the mayor's son, arrested twice for drunk driving, charges mysteriously dropped both times. The boy was 22 now, with no job, no prospects, and a reputation for causing trouble. Gregory Garrison's money and influence had always ensured Carlton faced no real consequences. After dinner, Jonathan and Emma walked their dog, Rusty, around the property. The evening air was crisp, filled with the sounds of spring peepers and the distant hum of traffic on County Route 47. "Dad, do you ever think about what would happen if Mom or I weren't here?" Emma asked suddenly, her tone uncharacteristically serious. Jonathan stopped walking. "What brought that on?" "I don't know. I was reading about that family in the next county, the car accident. It just made me think about how quickly things can change." Jonathan put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Life's uncertain, but that's why we make the most of every day. Your mom and I raised you to be strong, smart, and independent. Whatever happens, you'll be okay." Emma leaned into her father's embrace. "I love you, Dad." "Love you too, kiddo." As they walked back toward the house, Jonathan felt a deep contentment settle over him. Tomorrow, Emma would graduate as valedictorian. In the fall, she'd head to New York to begin her journalism career. Michelle had recently been promoted to head librarian at the county library. His business was thriving, with a 6-month waiting list for custom pieces. Life was perfect. Jonathan Hess had no way of knowing that in less than 24 hours, his perfect world would be shattered beyond repair, setting him on a path that would test every principle he'd ever held dear. Chapter 2. The night, everything changed. Saturday evening brought unseasonably warm weather to Millbrook County. Emma had insisted on driving herself to the graduation party at Jenny Spears' house, despite Jonathan's offer to pick her up later. "Dad, I'm 18 in 2 months, and I'll be living in New York in 4, she'd argued, keys jingling in her hand. "Besides, I'm the designated driver tonight. Half my class is going to be wasted." Michelle had sided with Emma, as usual. "Let her go, John. She's more responsible than most adults in this town." So at 11:47 p.m., Jonathan found himself lying in bed, listening for the sound of Emma's Honda Civic in the driveway. Michelle slept peacefully beside him, but sleep eluded Jonathan whenever Emma was out late. Old habits from when she first started driving. The phone rang at 11:52 p.m. Jonathan grabbed it before the second ring, not wanting to wake Michelle. The number was local but unfamiliar. "Mr. Hess." The voice was young, shaky. "This is Jenny Spears. There's been an accident." The world tilted. Jonathan sat up, his heart hammering. "What kind of accident? Where's Emma?" "On County Route 47, near the Morrison place." "Mr. Hess, you need to get here." "The ambulance. They said it's bad." Jonathan was moving before he'd fully processed the words, shaking Michelle awake, grabbing clothes from the chair. The drive to the scene took 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. Emergency lights strobed against the darkness, painting everything in urgent reds and blues. Emma's Honda was wrapped around an oak tree, the driver's side crushed beyond recognition. Jonathan ran toward the wreckage, but a paramedic caught his arm. "Sir, you can't. That's my daughter." The paramedic's face was grim. "Are you Jonathan Hess?" "Yes." "How is she? Can I see her?" The man looked away. "Sir, I'm sorry. She didn't survive the impact." The words hit Jonathan like physical blows. Michelle arrived moments later, and her screams when she saw the car echoed through the night air. Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Frank Morrison, Jonathan's oldest friend, appeared and wrapped him in a bear hug as Jonathan's legs gave out. "John, I'm so sorry. So damn sorry." Through his grief, Jonathan noticed something that didn't make sense. Emma's car had hit the tree head-on, but there were no skid marks on the road. The Honda's rear bumper was crumpled, paint scrapes revealing metal underneath. "Officer," Jonathan called to Deputy Scott Stewart, who was taking measurements. "Those paint scrapes, they're fresh." Stewart nodded grimly. "We noticed that too. Looks like she was rear-ended, maybe pushed into that tree. We're treating this as a hit and run." Hit and run. Someone had killed his daughter and left her to die alone. Michelle collapsed against Jonathan's chest, and he held her while she sobbed. Around them, the crime scene team worked methodically, photographing evidence, collecting paint samples. But Jonathan's mind was already racing ahead, analyzing details with the same precision he brought to his woodworking. The location troubled him. County Route 47 was a straight stretch with good visibility. Emma was an excellent driver who knew these roads like the back of her hand. For someone to rear-end her here, they'd have to be traveling at significant speed or be seriously impaired. "Mr. Hess." Chief Barry Richards approached, his expression carefully neutral. Jonathan had known Barry since high school. They played football together. "I need to ask you some questions." "Of course." "Emma been drinking tonight?" "No." Jonathan's voice was flat, certain. She was the designated driver. "Check her blood alcohol. It'll be 0. "Any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt your family?" Jonathan almost laughed at the absurdity. "Barry, you know Emma. She tutored kids, volunteered at the shelter, wrote articles for the school paper about recycling programs. Who could possibly want to hurt her?" But even as he said it, Jonathan remembered Emma's recent articles for the Millbrook Gazette internship. She'd been researching city contracts, asking questions about why certain construction projects went to specific companies despite higher bids from competitors. Michelle had teased her about being too ambitious for a high school intern. "I'll find who did this," Barry promised, but something in his tone felt hollow. The next few hours blurred together. The coroner arrived. Emma's body was removed. Friends and neighbors gathered at the Hess home, bringing food and condolences. Michelle retreated to their bedroom, inconsolable. Jonathan found himself in Emma's room, surrounded by her college acceptance letters, journalism awards, and dreams that would never be fulfilled. Frank Morrison found him there at dawn. "John, you need to get some sleep. I keep thinking she's going to walk through that door and tell me this was all some terrible mistake." Jonathan whispered. I know, buddy. I know. Frank, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to find out everything you can about what Emma was working on at the newspaper. Every article, every question she asked, every person she interviewed. Frank frowned. John, the police will handle the investigation. Jonathan turned to face his oldest friend, and Frank stepped back at what he saw in Jonathan's eyes. The police work for this town, Frank. And this town has secrets. If someone killed my daughter to cover those secrets, I'm going to find out who. And then what? Jonathan's voice was quiet, deadly calm. Then I'm going to make them pay. Chapter 3. The Truth Emerges. The funeral was held on Thursday morning at St. Mary's Catholic Church. The entire town turned out, students, teachers, business owners, even some of the county officials Emma had written about in her articles. Jonathan sat in the front pew, his arm around Michelle, watching person after person approach the microphone to share memories of their daughter. Mayor Gregory Garrison gave a speech about the tragic loss of a bright young mind and promised a full investigation. Jonathan watched the man's practiced politician smile and felt nothing but cold rage. Garrison's son Carlton was notably absent. After the service, as mourners filed past offering condolences, Oliver Horton approached Jonathan. The lawyer was an old friend of the family, having handled the legal work when Jonathan started his business. John, Michelle, I'm so sorry for your loss, Oliver said quietly. Emma was special. Thank you, Oliver. Could I speak with you privately for a moment? They stepped outside, away from the crowd. Oliver glanced around nervously before continuing. I heard you've been asking questions about Emma's journalism work. Frank told you. Frank's worried about you. So am I. Oliver lowered his voice. John, there are things about this town that go back decades. Old agreements, old debts. Some stones are better left unturned. Are you telling me not to investigate my daughter's murder? I'm telling you to be careful. Very careful. That evening, Frank Morrison arrived at the Hess home with a manila folder. I did what you asked, he said, glancing toward the kitchen where Michelle was mechanically washing dishes for the third time that day. Emma was digging into city construction contracts. Specifically, the new municipal building project. Jonathan opened the folder. Emma's meticulous notes covered 3 months of research. She discovered that Morrison Construction, Frank's family business, had submitted the lowest bid for the municipal building by nearly $200,000, but the contract had gone to Garrison Development, a company owned by Mayor Gregory Garrison's brother. Frank, you never mentioned this. Frank's face was grim, because I didn't want to believe it mattered. But Emma kept digging. She found similar patterns going back 15 years. Every major city project, every road expansion, every building contract, they all went to companies connected to the Garrison family, regardless of bid prices. Jonathan flipped through more pages. Emma had been methodical, documenting not just the contracts but the paper trails. Shell companies, dummy corporations, and at the center of it all, a web of corruption that had been bleeding the town dry for years. There's more, Frank continued. Emma scheduled an interview with Wendell Roy for last Saturday morning. The city accountant? Former city accountant. He was fired 3 weeks ago for budget discrepancies. Emma thought he might talk. Did she meet with him? That's just it. Roy's been missing since Friday. His landlord says he packed up and left town in the middle of the night. No forwarding address. The pieces began falling into place. Emma hadn't been killed by some random drunk driver. She'd been murdered because she'd uncovered something that threatened the most powerful family in Millbrook County. There's something else, Frank said reluctantly. I talked to some of the kids from the party Saturday night. They said Carlton Garrison showed up around 10:30, already drunk. Made some ugly comments about Emma. What kind of comments? Sexual stuff. Jenny Spears told him to leave. He got belligerent, said his family owned the town and he could do whatever he wanted. Left around 11. Heading toward County Route 47. The timeline matched perfectly. Emma had left the party at 11:15. Carlton would have been on the same road, drunk and angry about being humiliated in front of the other kids. Jonathan closed the folder, his hands steady despite the rage building inside him. Frank, I need another favor. John, I need you to find Carlton Garrison. Why? Jonathan met his friend's eyes. Because I'm going to ask him some questions about Saturday night. Frank shifted uncomfortably. And what if he doesn't want to answer? Then I'll find a way to persuade him. The next morning, Jonathan drove to the police station. Chief Barry Richards looked uncomfortable when Jonathan walked into his office. Any progress on the investigation? Jonathan asked. We're following several leads. These things take time. What about the paint samples from Emma's car? Barry's hesitation was telling. Lab results take weeks, you know that. Barry, we've known each other for 25 years. Look me in the eye and tell me you're doing everything possible to find my daughter's killer. Barry couldn't meet his gaze. John, I understand you're grieving, but you need to let us handle this. Handle it? Like you handled Carlton Garrison's drunk driving arrests? Like you handled the city contract investigations? I don't know what you're talking about. Jonathan leaned forward. Emma was investigating corruption in city government. The city accountant disappeared the night before she was supposed to interview him. Carlton Garrison was drunk at the same party Emma left, driving the same road where she was killed. And you're telling me these are just coincidences? Barry's face flushed red. John, you're upset, and I understand that. But making wild accusations. I'm not making accusations. I'm stating facts. Jonathan stood. And since you won't investigate them, I will. Don't do anything stupid, John. I'd hate to have to arrest you on top of everything else. Jonathan paused at the door. Is that a threat, Barry? It's friendly advice. Then here's some friendly advice for you. Jonathan said softly. When I find out who killed my daughter, I'm going to make sure they pay for it. All of them. And if you're part of the cover-up, that includes you. That afternoon, Jonathan began his own investigation. He drove to every business, every restaurant, every gas station along County Route 47, showing Emma's photo and Carlton Garrison's photo to anyone who would talk. Most people remembered Emma. She'd been featured in the local paper for her academic achievements. Several remembered seeing Carlton's black BMW that Saturday night. At Mel's Diner, just 3 miles from the accident site, the night shift waitress named Melody Chavez pulled Jonathan aside. I saw that boy Saturday night, she whispered, glancing around nervously. He came in around midnight, stumbling drunk. His car had damage to the front end, fresh damage. Asked me if we had a car wash. Did you see his license plate? Didn't need to. Everyone knows that car. Carlton Garrison's the only one in town with a black BMW with custom plates that say Mayor 1. Jonathan felt the final piece click into place. Melody, would you be willing to talk to the police about this? She laughed bitterly. Mister, I've got 3 kids and I need this job. The Garrisons own the company that owns this diner. You think I'm going to risk everything to accuse the mayor's son of murder? What if I could guarantee your safety? How? Jonathan didn't answer immediately. How could he guarantee anything when the entire system was corrupt? When the police chief was bought and paid for? When the mayor's family had been running the town like their personal fiefdom for decades? I'll figure something out, he said finally. That night, Jonathan sat in his workshop. Emma's research spread across his workbench. Michelle had retreated to bed early again, lost in grief. The house felt hollow without Emma's laughter, without her dreams filling the rooms. Jonathan picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he hadn't called in years. Tyrone Baker had been his cellmate during the 6 months Jonathan spent in county jail for assault when he was 23, a bar fight that got out of hand when someone made inappropriate comments about Michelle. Tyrone had taught Jonathan that sometimes the system failed good people, and when it did, those people had to find other ways to get justice. Tyrone now ran a private security company in the state capital, employing former military and law enforcement who'd grown disillusioned with bureaucracy and corruption. Tyrone, it's Jonathan Hess. John, Jesus, how long has it been? 10 years. About that. Tyrone, I need help. Someone killed my daughter, and the local police are covering it up. The line went quiet for a long moment. Tell me everything. Jonathan talked for an hour, laying out Emma's investigation, the hit and run, the evidence pointing to Carlton Garrison, and Chief Richards' obvious reluctance to pursue the case. You're talking about going up against an entire corrupt political machine, Tyrone said finally. That's not something you do halfway. I understand. Do you? Because once you start down this road, there's no going back. These people will use every resource they have to destroy you. They'll come after your business, your wife, everything you care about. Jonathan looked at a photo of Emma on his workbench, graduation day, her smile radiant with hope for the future. They already destroyed everything I care about. All right then, give me 48 hours. I'll send some people to look into this Garrison family, find out exactly how deep this corruption goes. But John, if we're doing this, we're doing it right. No half measures, no mercy. These people killed your daughter and think they can walk away clean. We're going to prove them wrong. After hanging up, Jonathan sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by the tools of his trade. For 20 years, he built things with these hands, furniture that would last generations, a business built on honesty and craftsmanship, a life of quiet integrity. Now those same hands would be used for a different kind of construction. He was going to build a trap, carefully crafted and precisely engineered. And when it was finished, everyone responsible for Emma's death would find themselves caught inside it, with no way out. The old Jonathan Hess, the man who believed in working within the system, who trusted that justice would prevail, had died with his daughter on County Route 47. What emerged from that death was something altogether different. Something colder, more calculating, and infinitely more dangerous than the Garrison family could possibly imagine. Chapter 4. Gathering Intelligence. Tyrone Baker arrived in Millbrook on a Tuesday morning, driving an unremarkable gray sedan and carrying credentials identifying him as an insurance investigator looking into the accident. With him came two associates, Ray Mack, a former Army intelligence specialist who could make computers give up secrets they didn't know they had, and Stacy Harmon, an ex-DEA agent whose petite frame and friendly demeanor disguised a mind that could dissect criminal organizations like a surgeon. They set up operations in a rental house on the outskirts of town, and within 72 hours, they had compiled a dossier on the Garrison family that would have impressed the FBI. Jonathan studied the files in his workshop while Michelle attended grief counseling at the church. The scope of the corruption was staggering. For 3 generations, the Garrisons had systematically looted Millbrook County through a combination of political influence, strategic bribes, and outright intimidation. Your daughter was closer to the truth than she knew, Stacy said, spreading photos across Jonathan's workbench. Gregory Garrison's net worth is approximately $12 million on a mayor's salary of $65,000 a year. His brother Marcus owns 17 companies that have received city contracts worth $43 million over the past decade. Ray pulled up files on his laptop. But here's where it gets interesting. Carlton Garrison isn't just the mayor's useless son. He's been laundering money through a series of dummy corporations based in the Cayman Islands. Kid's got accounts worth $2.6 million. How is that possible? Jonathan asked. Daddy's been paying him a salary as a consultant for every city project, Tyrone explained. $200,000 per contract, for work that exists only on paper. It's been going on since Carlton turned 18. Stacy added, the hit and run wasn't random, Jonathan. Emma was 48 hours away from publishing an article that would have exposed the entire operation. Someone tipped off the Garrisons that she was getting close. Who? We're still working on that. But we know Carlton didn't plan the murder. This was a panic move, drunk, angry, and sloppy. The cover-up afterward, that's where we see the family's real influence. Ray turned his laptop screen toward Jonathan. Chief Barry Richards received a cash deposit of $50,000 into his personal account on Sunday morning, the day after the accident. The deposit came from an account linked to Garrison Development. The betrayal hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Barry Richards had looked him in the eye, promised to find Emma's killer, all while knowing exactly who was responsible. There's more, Tyrone continued. The lab that's supposed to be analyzing the paint samples from Emma's car? They've been told to delay the results indefinitely. The tow truck driver who removed Carlton's BMW from the scene? He's been paid to say he never saw any damage. 3 witnesses who saw Carlton's car near the accident site have all been offered jobs out of state. Jonathan felt his worldview reshaping itself. How do we prove all this? We don't, Tyrone said simply. Not through legal channels. The district attorney is Gregory Garrison's golf partner. The state police defer to local jurisdiction. The FBI won't touch a case this small without ironclad evidence, and all the evidence is being destroyed or hidden. So what are you suggesting? Stacy leaned forward. We're suggesting that sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms. It comes from people who refuse to let evil win. That evening, Jonathan had dinner with Michelle for the first time since the funeral. She'd been existing on coffee and grief for 2 weeks, but her therapist had insisted she needed to start taking care of herself. How was your day? She asked, though her voice sounded hollow. I've been thinking about selling the business, Jonathan lied smoothly. Maybe we should leave Millbrook. Start over somewhere else. Michelle looked up from her barely touched food. John, we can't run away from what happened. We're not running. We're choosing to build a new life somewhere that doesn't remind us of Emma every day. But this is our home. Emma loved this place. Emma is gone, Michigan, and staying here won't bring her back. Michelle's eyes filled with tears. I know she's gone. I wake up every morning hoping it was just a nightmare. And every morning I have to remember all over again that my baby is dead. Jonathan reached across the table and took her hand. I'm going to find out who did this to her. I promise you that. The police said. The police are lying. Michelle stared at him. What do you mean? I mean, I've been doing some investigating of my own. Emma was killed because she found out about corruption in city government. The hit and run wasn't an accident. John, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. The people who killed our daughter are still out there, and they think they've gotten away with it. Michelle pulled her hand away. So what are you planning to do? Get yourself killed too. I'm planning to get justice. Through the courts. Jonathan met her eyes. If necessary. Michelle stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. Emma was my daughter too, John. If someone murdered her and the police won't do anything about it, then we do what we have to do. Jonathan felt a surge of love for his wife. Even broken by grief, Michelle was still the strongest person he knew. It might get dangerous, he warned. It already is dangerous. We're living in a town where people can murder teenage girls and buy their way out of consequences. How much more dangerous can it get? The next morning, Jonathan met with Tyrone's team at the rental house. Ray had been busy overnight, hacking into the Garrison family's digital communications. Carlton's been texting his friends about the accident, Ray reported. Kids too stupid to use encrypted messaging. Look at this. He pulled up a series of text messages from Carlton's phone. Old man says cops are handling everything. Stupid bitch shouldn't have been writing articles about our family. Dad's lawyer says I don't have to worry. Small town cops know which side their bread is buttered on. Rich daddy fixes everything. That's what money's for, right? Jonathan read the messages twice, his hands trembling with rage. Carlton wasn't just guilty. He was proud of what he'd done. There's more, Stacy said. We tracked down Wendell Roy, the missing city accountant. He's hiding out in a motel 3 counties over, scared out of his mind. Turns out the Garrisons didn't just fire him, they threatened his family. Roy's got copies of all the financial records proving the corruption. Will he testify? Not willingly. But if the Garrisons were permanently removed from power, he might be willing to come forward. Tyrone spread out a map of Millbrook County. Here's what we know. Gregory Garrison has controlled this town for 20 years through a combination of legitimate political power and criminal activity. His brother Marcus handles the business side, the contracts, the money laundering, the payoffs. Carlton is the weak link, spoiled, arrogant, and careless. What about Chief Richards? Jonathan asked. Bought and paid for, but he's not family. He's expendable if things get too hot. Jonathan studied the map, his mind working through possibilities. If we take down Carlton first, the others will circle the wagons. They'll destroy evidence, eliminate witnesses, maybe even flee the country. Agreed, Tyrone said. Which is why we don't start with Carlton. What do you mean? Stacy smiled grimly. We start by making them turn on each other. Over the next hour, they outlined a plan that was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications. It would require perfect timing, absolute commitment, and a willingness to cross lines that Jonathan had never imagined crossing. This isn't just about revenge, Tyrone warned. Once we start this, we're at war with these people. They'll use every dirty trick they know to destroy us. Jonathan thought about Emma's research, her dreams of being an investigative journalist, her belief that truth and justice would always prevail. The people who killed her had stolen more than just her life. They'd stolen her faith in the system she wanted to serve. When do we start? Jonathan asked. Tyrone checked his watch. Phase 1 begins tonight. Chapter 5, The Web Titans. At 2:47 a.m. on a moonless Friday morning, Ray Mack crept through the shadows of Garrison Development's corporate headquarters. The building, constructed with city funds through a sweetheart lease deal, housed the nerve center of the family's criminal enterprise. Security was minimal, 2 cameras and a basic alarm system that Ray had disabled from his car 15 minutes earlier. Using techniques learned during 8 years with Army intelligence, Ray penetrated Marcus Garrison's office and installed hardware that would give him complete access to the company's computer network. By dawn, every email, every financial transaction, every digital communication would be flowing directly to his monitoring station. Simultaneously, Stacy Harmon was implementing a different kind of infiltration. Over the past week, she had cultivated a friendship with Barb Schmidt, Gregory Garrison's longtime secretary. Barb was a divorced mother of two, struggling to make ends meet on a secretary's salary while watching the Garrison family live in luxury built on stolen taxpayer money. "I just think it's interesting how certain families seem to get all the breaks in this town," Stacy said over coffee at Mel's diner, her voice carefully casual. Barb glanced around nervously. "You shouldn't talk like that. People have been fired for less." "Fired for what?" "Noticing that the mayor's brother gets every city contract regardless of his bids? That's just public record." "Maybe. But public records have a way of disappearing when they're inconvenient for certain people." Stacy leaned forward. "What if I told you there was a way to change that? A way to make sure the truth came out?" "I'd say you were crazy. The Garrisons own this town. They own the officials. They don't own the people. And people are getting tired of being robbed blind while politicians get rich." Barb stirred her coffee absently. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that someone with access to the mayor's office might be able to document certain activities. Phone calls, meetings, financial records. Information that could help honest citizens understand exactly how their tax money is being spent. That someone would be taking a huge risk. That someone would also be protecting their community from criminals who happen to wear suits instead of masks." Meanwhile, Jonathan was implementing his own piece of the plan. Using contacts from his years in the local business community, he began quietly spreading carefully crafted rumors about the Garrison family's activities. Not accusations. Rumors were more dangerous because they couldn't be directly challenged. At the Rotary Club lunch, he mentioned to Calvin Chase, who owned the local bank, that he'd heard the FBI was interested in municipal construction contracts. At the Chamber of Commerce meeting, he suggested to Wendell Roy's replacement that someone should really audit the city's finances before the next budget cycle. Each conversation was brief, innocent-sounding, and planted in minds that were already suspicious about the Garrison's sudden wealth. "The key," Tyrone had explained, "is making them paranoid. When criminals think they're being investigated, they start making mistakes." The first mistake came on Tuesday morning, when Marcus Garrison called an emergency meeting with his brother and Chief Richards. Ray's surveillance equipment captured every word. "Someone's been asking questions about our business," Marcus said, his voice tight with anxiety. Calvin Chase mentioned that Jonathan Hess was talking about federal investigations. "Hess is just a grieving father making noise," Gregory replied. "Barry's handling him." "Am I?" Chief Richards sounded nervous. "Because he's been all over town asking questions. People are starting to talk." "About what?" "About Carlton's accident. About why we haven't made any arrests. About where all the construction money has been going." There was a long silence before Gregory spoke again. "Maybe it's time we sent Mr. Hess a more direct message." "What kind of message?" Marcus asked. "The kind that makes him understand that some investigations can be dangerous for everyone involved." That evening, Jonathan found his workshop's windows broken and his tools scattered across the floor. Spray painted across his workbench was a simple message: "Stop digging or join your daughter." Michelle found him standing in the wreckage, his face expressionless. "Oh God, John. Who would do this?" "People who are scared," he replied calmly. "People who know they're about to be exposed." "Should we call the police?" Jonathan almost laughed. "And tell them what?" "That Chief Richards' bosses are trying to intimidate us." Michelle looked around at the destroyed workshop. "What do we do now?" "Now we know we're on the right track." Jonathan spent the next hour cleaning up the workshop, his movements methodical and controlled. Each broken tool was cataloged, each damaged piece of furniture noted. When Tyrone arrived, he found Jonathan sitting calmly at his workbench, writing in a notebook. "Making a list," Jonathan explained. "Things I need to replace. Things I need to repair. That's all. That's all." Jonathan looked up, and Tyrone saw something in his eyes that made him step back. "They want to play intimidation games. Fine. Let's see how they handle it when someone plays back." The next phase of the plan required Jonathan to become visible again, to resume his normal activities as if the threat had worked. He reopened his workshop, placed orders for new tools, and accepted sympathy visits from friends and neighbors. But beneath the surface, the web was tightening around the Garrison family. Ray's surveillance revealed that Carlton was becoming increasingly erratic, drinking heavily and making frequent phone calls to his father. The pressure of keeping his crime secret was taking its toll on someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Barb Schmidt had begun discreetly photographing documents in Gregory Garrison's office, building a comprehensive record of the family's corruption. Financial records, meeting notes, phone logs, all flowing to Stacy's secure email account. Most importantly, Wendell Roy had agreed to a secret meeting. The former city accountant was ready to come forward with evidence, but only if he could be guaranteed protection from retaliation. "I've got 15 years of records," Roy told Jonathan during a clandestine meeting at an abandoned gas station. "Every fraudulent contract, every kickback, every laundered dollar. The Garrisons have stolen over $20 million from this county. Why didn't you speak up sooner?" "Because I was scared. But when I heard about that girl, Emma, she was trying to expose the same things I'd been documenting. If they killed her for it, they'll kill me too unless someone stops them." Jonathan studied the terrified man across from him. "What do you need to feel safe?" "I need them gone. All of them. And I need ironclad proof that they can't come after me later." "What if I could give you both?" Roy's eyes widened. "How?" "Leave that to me. Just be ready to move when I call." As Jonathan drove home that night, he felt the familiar calm that came before completing a difficult project. All the pieces were in place. All the tools were ready. Tomorrow, he would begin the final phase of his construction project, the one that would trap the Garrison family in a prison of their own making. Emma's killers thought they had won. They thought their money and power made them untouchable. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Chapter 6. The First Move. Saturday night brought the annual Millbrook County Sheriff's Department charity auction, held at the Garrison Country Club. It was a social obligation for anyone with political or business connections in the county, which made it the perfect opportunity for Jonathan's first direct strike. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. While Gregory, Marcus, and Carlton Garrison socialized with the county's elite, Ray Mack would be in Marcus's house, installing surveillance equipment and copying files from his home office. Stacy would use the distraction to plant evidence in Chief Richard's patrol car, and Jonathan would attend the auction, establishing his presence while sending a very specific message. Jonathan arrived at 7:30 p.m., wearing his best suit and carrying a check for $5,000, his contribution to the Police Benevolent Fund. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was funding the very organization that was covering up his daughter's murder. The Garrison family was holding court near the bar. Gregory worked the room like the seasoned politician he was, shaking hands and making promises. Marcus stood nearby, discussing an upcoming housing development with potential investors. Carlton lurked at the edge of the group, already drunk despite the early hour. Jonathan approached slowly, waiting for the right moment. When Gregory finished his conversation with the county commissioner, Jonathan stepped forward. "Mayor Garrison, good to see you." Gregory's smile faltered slightly. "Jonathan, I wasn't sure you'd be joining us tonight, given your recent loss." "Emma always believed in supporting community institutions," Jonathan replied smoothly. "I thought she'd want me to be here." "Of course. How are you holding up?" "Better every day, especially now that I'm learning more about what Emma was working on before she died." The temperature around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. Gregory's smile became fixed. "Oh, her journalism project. The one about city contracts and fiscal responsibility. Fascinating stuff, really." She had quite an eye for detail. Marcus had stopped his conversation and was listening intently. Carlton swayed slightly, his bloodshot eyes focused on Jonathan with growing hostility. "Young journalists often see corruption where there's simply efficient government," Gregory said carefully. "True. But Emma wasn't just young, she was thorough. She documented everything. Every contract, every discrepancy, every suspicious transaction." Jonathan's voice remained conversational, but his eyes never left Gregory's face. "Did you know she was planning to submit her findings to the state attorney general's office?" The lie hit its target perfectly. Gregory's face went pale. "I'm sure there was nothing in her research that would interest state investigators." "I certainly hope not. For everyone's sake." Carlton stepped forward, swaying dangerously. "Hey, you're that guy whose daughter." "Carlton." Gregory's voice cut like a whip. "Why don't you get some air?" "No, I want to talk to him. I want to talk to the guy whose daughter thought she was some kind of hotshot reporter. Carlton's words slurred together. Maybe if she'd minded her own business, she'd still be. The punch came so fast that Carlton never saw it coming. Jonathan's fist connected with the younger man's jaw with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. Carlton dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the floor. The charity auction ground to a halt. 200 of Millbrook County's most prominent citizens stared in shock as Jonathan stood over the mayor's son, his knuckles bleeding. Anyone else want to talk about my daughter? Jonathan asked the silent room. Chief Richards pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on his service weapon. Jonathan Hess, you're under arrest for assault. Am I? Jonathan held up his cell phone. Because I've been recording this conversation. Would you like me to play back what Carlton just said about Emma? Richards hesitated. In the phone's memory was audio that would prove Carlton had prior knowledge of Emma's death, knowledge that could only come from being responsible for it. Put the phone away, John, Richards said quietly. Let's all calm down. I am calm, Barry. Calmer than I've been since someone murdered my daughter and you decided to cover it up. The crowd began murmuring. These were people who had known Emma, who had watched her grow up. Jonathan's words carried weight. Gregory stepped forward, his politician's instincts taking over. Gentlemen, this is clearly a misunderstanding. Jonathan is grieving, and my son spoke inappropriately. Perhaps we should. Perhaps you should explain why your son knew details about Emma's death that weren't released to the public, Jonathan interrupted. Or why Chief Richards received $50,000 in his bank account the day after she was killed. Or why the paint samples from her car have been sitting in an evidence locker for 3 weeks without being tested. The murmuring grew louder. Jonathan had just publicly accused the mayor and police chief of covering up a murder, and he'd done it in front of every influential person in the county. You're distraught, Gregory said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're making wild accusations. I'm making statements of fact, and I have documentation to prove every one of them. It was another lie, but it hit home. Gregory's face went ashen. Marcus grabbed his brother's arm, whispering urgently in his ear. Chief Richards looked like he wanted to arrest Jonathan, but couldn't figure out how to do it without making everything worse. Jonathan picked up his charity contribution check and tore it in half. I don't think I'll be supporting the police benevolent fund after all. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mayor Garrison? My condolences on your son's accident. I hope he recovers quickly. As Jonathan walked out of the country club, leaving Carlton unconscious on the floor and the Garrison family in chaos, he felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. The first move was complete. Phase 2 would begin at dawn. 20 minutes later, as Jonathan drove toward home, his phone rang. Tyrone's voice was tight with excitement. Ray hit the jackpot. Marcus Garrison's home office was a treasure trove. Financial records, meeting transcripts, even audio recordings of conversations with Chief Richards. We've got enough evidence to send all of them to federal prison for the next century. Good. What about Stacy? She planted the evidence in Richards' patrol car. When Internal Affairs searches it tomorrow, they'll find documents linking him directly to the cover-up. Tomorrow. Anonymous tip is already in the system. IA will be all over him by noon. Jonathan smiled grimly. Excellent. How's Carlton? Paramedics took him to the hospital. Broken jaw, concussion. Kid's going to be drinking through a straw for the next 2 months. Shame. What about the audio recording from tonight? Crystal clear. Carlton basically confessed to murder in front of 200 witnesses. Even if the Garrisons try to claim it was drunken bragging, it's still evidence of guilty knowledge. Jonathan felt the pieces falling into place exactly as planned. Tyrone, I want you to release everything to the media at exactly the same time. Every television station, every newspaper, every online outlet within 300 miles. I want it coordinated so the Garrisons can't get ahead of the story. When? Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. By the time they wake up, their entire world will have collapsed. As Jonathan pulled into his driveway, he saw Michelle waiting on the front porch. She ran to him as he got out of the car, throwing her arms around him. The hospital called, she said breathlessly. They said Carlton Garrison was assaulted at the charity auction and you were involved. Are you okay? I'm fine. What happened? Jonathan looked down at his wife. This woman who had stood by him through everything, who had raised their daughter to believe in truth and justice, who deserved to know that Emma's killer would finally pay for his crimes. I hit him. Why? Because he said something about Emma. something that proved he knew more about her death than he should have. Michelle studied his face in the porch light. John, what aren't you telling me? I'm telling you that the people who killed our daughter are about to face justice. Real justice. What does that mean? Jonathan took her hands in his. It means that by Monday night, Carlton Garrison will be in a jail cell, Gregory Garrison will be facing federal charges, and Chief Richards will be unemployed. It means Emma's killers are going to pay for what they did. Michelle stared at him for a long moment. How do you know all this? Because I'm making it happen. Instead of fear or shock, Jonathan saw something else in his wife's eyes, approval. Good, she said simply. What can I do to help? Jonathan smiled, feeling a surge of love for the woman who had chosen to stand with him even when the path ahead led into darkness. Just trust me, and be ready to leave town if things go badly. They won't go badly. How can you be sure? Michelle's eyes were hard as steel. Because Emma raised by people who don't give up. And neither do we. As they walked into the house together, Jonathan felt the last piece of his plan click into place. Monday morning, the Garrison family's world would collapse. But tonight, he was going to sleep peacefully for the first time since his daughter died. Justice was coming to Millbrook County, and it was coming with Jonathan Hess's name on it. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. Monday morning began with Ray Mack's voice crackling through Jonathan's encrypted radio at 6 a.m. sharp. All packages delivered. Media Blitz goes live in exactly 2 hours. Jonathan stood in his workshop, fully dressed despite the early hour, watching through his window as the first rays of sunlight touched Emma's grave marker in the distance. Today was the day his daughter would finally have justice. At 7:30 a.m., Barb Schmidt arrived at City Hall as usual, but instead of heading to her desk, she walked directly to the FBI field office in the next county. In her purse were copies of every document she'd photographed over the past 2 weeks, along with a sworn affidavit detailing the Garrison family's criminal activities. At 7:45 a.m., Wendell Roy emerged from hiding and presented himself to the state attorney general's office, carrying 15 years' worth of financial records that proved systematic corruption on a massive scale. At 8 a.m. exactly, every major news outlet within 300 miles simultaneously broke the story of the Millbrook County corruption scandal. Television stations led with headlines like "Mayor's Family Accused of Massive Corruption" and "Police Chief Allegedly Covered Up Teen's Murder." Radio stations played audio clips of Carlton Garrison's drunken confession from Saturday night. Newspaper websites published detailed financial records showing how the Garrison family had systematically looted the county treasury. Jonathan watched the media explosion from his living room, Michelle beside him on the couch. Their local morning show had been preempted by breaking news coverage. "This is incredible," Michelle breathed, watching footage of FBI agents raiding Garrison development offices. "How did all this come together so quickly?" "Sometimes the truth has a way of surfacing all at once," Jonathan replied. His phone rang. Chief Richards' voice was panicked, angry. What the hell have you done?" "I have no idea what you're talking about, Barry. Internal Affairs is here. They're searching my office, my car, my house. They say someone provided evidence that I took bribes to cover up your daughter's murder." "Did you?" "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point. You took money to cover up Emma's murder, and now you're facing the consequences." "You son of a bitch, I'll..." Jonathan hung up. The phone rang again immediately. This time it was Marcus Garrison, his voice tight, with barely controlled rage. "You think you're clever, don't you, Hess? I think I'm a father who wanted justice for his daughter. You have no idea what you've started. My family has connections you can't imagine. We'll destroy you, your wife, your business. Your family is finished, Marcus. By tonight, you'll be in federal custody." "We'll see about that." The line went dead. At 9:30 a.m., Jonathan received a text message from Tyrone. "Package 3 delivered." That was the signal that Carlton Garrison had been arrested at his apartment, charged with vehicular homicide and leaving the scene of an accident. The physical evidence linking his BMW to Emma's Honda had been discovered during a search warrant executed by state police. By noon, the story had gone national. Cable news networks were running footage of the Garrison family's luxury homes being searched by federal agents. Financial experts were analyzing the corruption scheme, marveling at its scope and audacity. Gregory Garrison held a hastily arranged press conference at 1 p.m., proclaiming his innocence and blaming political enemies for the allegations. He was arrested on camera 45 minutes later, federal agents leading him away in handcuffs as reporters shouted questions. Jonathan watched it all with the same calm satisfaction he felt when completing a difficult woodworking project. Every piece had fit together perfectly. Every cut had been precise. Every joint had held under pressure. At 3 p.m., his phone rang one final time. Tyrone's voice was grim. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Carlton Garrison is dead." Jonathan felt the world tilt. What happened? Apparent suicide in his jail cell. Hung himself with his bedsheets an hour after being arrested. The news hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Carlton was supposed to live, to face trial, to spend decades in prison paying for what he'd done to Emma. Death was too easy, too clean. "John, you there?" "I'm here. There's something else." Before he died, Carlton left a written confession. Full details about the hit and run, the cover-up, everything. He couldn't handle the pressure once he realized his family couldn't protect him anymore. Jonathan closed his eyes. Justice had been served, but not in the way he'd planned. Carlton Garrison had taken the coward's way out, leaving behind only words on paper to account for Emma's life. What about Gregory and Marcus? Federal custody. They'll be arraigned tomorrow on corruption, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. With Carlton's confession and Wendell Roy's financial records, they're looking at life sentences. And Richards? Arrested an hour ago. The evidence Stacy planted, combined with the financial records, has internal affairs recommending federal charges. He's finished. Jonathan hung up and sat in silence for several minutes. The plan had worked almost perfectly, but Carlton's suicide left him feeling hollow. There would be no trial, no opportunity for Emma's killer to face her family in court, no chance for Carlton to truly understand the magnitude of what he'd taken from the world. Michelle found him in the workshop an hour later, staring at Emma's photo on his workbench. "I heard about Carlton," she said softly. "He couldn't face what he'd done." "Good." Jonathan looked up, surprised. "Good. John, he killed our daughter and laughed about it. He bragged about how his daddy's money would protect him. He showed no remorse, no guilt, no human decency. I'm glad he's dead. I wanted him to suffer. He did suffer. That's why he killed himself. The prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison, of losing everything he thought made him special, it was more than his pampered little soul could handle." Michelle sat down beside her husband. "Emma's killer is dead. The people who covered it up are going to prison. The corruption that's been bleeding this county dry for decades has been exposed. You did what the system couldn't do." "We did," Jonathan corrected. "We did it together." That evening, as news coverage continued to blanket the airways, Jonathan and Michelle visited Emma's grave. The headstone was simple: Emma Catherine Hess, beloved daughter, seeker of truth. "She would have been proud," Michelle said, placing fresh flowers on the grave. "She would have wanted the story," Jonathan replied. "She would have wanted to write about how her death exposed the corruption, how justice eventually prevailed. Maybe someone will write that story. Maybe." As they walked back to their car, Jonathan felt a sense of completion he hadn't experienced since Emma's death. The trap he'd constructed had worked perfectly, catching not just his daughter's killer, but the entire network of corruption that had enabled the crime. But as they drove home through the town that would never be the same, Jonathan realized that his war with the Garrison family wasn't quite over. The patriarch of the clan, Gregory's father Maxwell Garrison, remained free. And according to Tyrone's intelligence, Maxwell was the true architect of the family's criminal empire, a man who had been pulling strings from the shadows for 50 years. Carlton was dead. Gregory and Marcus would spend their lives in prison. But Maxwell Garrison had resources, connections, and decades of experience in avoiding consequences for his actions. The old man would want revenge for his family's destruction. And when he came for it, Jonathan intended to be ready. The game wasn't over. It was just entering its final phase. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. Maxwell Garrison was 83 years old, but his mind remained sharp as a blade. From his estate outside the county limits, he had built a criminal empire spanning 3 states, using his sons and grandson as front men while he remained safely in the shadows. The destruction of his family had taken him by surprise, the first time in 50 years that anyone had outmaneuvered him. Now, as he sat in his study surrounded by newspaper clippings about the scandal, he planned his response. Jonathan Hess had declared war on the Garrison family. Maxwell intended to finish it. 3 days after Carlton's suicide, Jonathan received an unexpected visitor. Oliver Horton arrived at the workshop just after sunset, his usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious nervousness. "John, we need to talk." "Of course. What's on your mind?" Oliver glanced around the workshop, noting the new security cameras Jonathan had installed. "Not here. Take a drive with me." They drove in silence to the old quarry outside town, a place where teenagers went to drink beer and where conversations couldn't be overheard. Oliver parked overlooking the water and turned off the engine. "Maxwell Garrison contacted me today." Jonathan felt his blood chill. "About what?" "He wants to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" Oliver's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. "He's offering you $10 million to leave the county and never return. Clean money, no strings attached. You and Michelle can start over anywhere in the world. And if I refuse, he'll destroy everything you care about. Your business, your home, your reputation. And if that doesn't work..." Oliver couldn't finish the sentence. "He'll kill us." "John, this man has been eliminating problems for 5 decades. He has connections you can't imagine, people in government, law enforcement, organized crime. The FBI investigation won't touch him because he's too careful, too insulated." Jonathan stared out at the dark water. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd deliver the message." "But John, you need to understand something. I've known Maxwell Garrison for 30 years. He doesn't make empty threats. Neither do I." Oliver turned to face his old friend. "What does that mean?" "It means Maxwell Garrison made one crucial mistake. He assumes I care about money, or my business, or even my own life more than I care about justice for Emma. John, he killed my daughter, Oliver. Maybe not directly, but he created Carlton. He built the system that protected him, and he covered up the murder. Maxwell Garrison is as responsible for Emma's death as if he'd been driving that BMW himself. So what are you going to do?" Jonathan's voice was quiet, deadly calm. "I'm going to finish what I started." Oliver dropped his cigarette, crushing it under his heel. "Jesus Christ, John. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about justice. There's a difference." "Sometimes." The next morning, Jonathan called Tyrone. "I need to meet with Maxwell Garrison." "That's not happening. The man surrounded by private security, lives in a fortress, and hasn't left his property in 10 years. Then I need you to get me onto his property." "John, this is insane. You've already won. The family's destroyed, the corruption's exposed, Emma's killer is dead. Why risk everything now?" "Because Maxwell Garrison wants to make a deal, and I want to hear his offer in person." Tyrone sighed. "This is a bad idea. Most of the best ideas are." Maxwell Garrison's estate was a monument to decades of stolen wealth. The main house sat on 200 acres of manicured grounds, protected by high walls, electronic surveillance, and armed guards. It was designed to be impregnable, which was exactly why Jonathan had to get inside. Tyrone's team spent 48 hours studying the property's defenses. Ray identified vulnerabilities in the electronic security system. Stacy mapped the guards' patrol patterns. But getting Jonathan inside would require a direct approach. "I'm going to call him," Jonathan announced during their planning session. "I'm going to tell him I want to discuss his offer." "He'll never let you in armed," Tyrone warned. "I don't plan to be armed." "Then how do you plan to?" Tyrone stopped, understanding dawning in his eyes. "John, no. Absolutely not. It's the only way. There has to be another option. Maxwell Garrison has spent 50 years hiding behind other people, using money and influence to avoid consequences. The only way to reach him is to get close enough that money and influence don't matter." That evening, Jonathan made the call. Maxwell Garrison's voice was cultured, refined, carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Mr. Hess, I wondered when you'd contact me. I understand you want to make a deal." "Indeed. Shall we discuss terms?" "In person. Tomorrow night." There was a pause. "That's not how I conduct business. It's how I conduct mine. You want me gone, Mr. Garrison? You'll have to look me in the eye and tell me why." Another pause, longer this time. "Very well. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone and come unarmed. My security will ensure compliance with both conditions." "Understood. Mr. Hess, I hope you're prepared to be reasonable. It would be unfortunate if this conversation ended poorly for everyone involved." The line went dead. Jonathan spent the next day with Michelle, walking through their property, visiting Emma's grave, talking about their future. He didn't tell her about the meeting with Maxwell Garrison. There was no point in making her worry about something she couldn't change. At 7:30 p.m., Jonathan drove to the Garrison estate. The guards searched him thoroughly, confiscated his phone, and escorted him through gardens worth more than most people's homes. The house itself was a Georgian mansion that belonged in a museum, filled with art and antiques purchased with stolen money. Maxwell Garrison waited in his study, a tall, distinguished man who carried his 83 years with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Bourbon? No, thank you. Pity. It's excellent bourbon, acquired during Prohibition through business arrangements that would be considered illegal today. Maxwell poured himself 3 fingers of amber liquid. Much like this conversation, I suspect. You wanted to make an offer. Indeed. $10 million, transferred to any account you specify. In exchange, you and your wife leave Millbrook County permanently and agree never to discuss my family's business with anyone. Jonathan studied the old man's face. That's generous. I can afford to be generous. Your daughter's death was regrettable, but it's over. Carlton is dead, my other sons are in prison, and their immediate assets have been seized. You've had your revenge, Mr. Hess. Why not take the money and enjoy the rest of your life? Because Emma isn't at rest. I beg your pardon. Jonathan leaned forward. My daughter believed in justice. She believed that truth would always overcome corruption, that good people would always defeat evil people if they had the courage to stand up. You and your family destroyed that belief along with her life. Maxwell's expression didn't change. And you think killing me will restore it? I think ensuring you face consequences for your actions will honor her memory. Mr. Hess, you've made a fundamental error. You assume I'm as vulnerable as my sons were. I assure you, I'm not. Maxwell pressed a button on his desk. 2 armed men entered the study, their weapons trained on Jonathan. You see, I've been eliminating problems much longer than you've been creating them. Your wife, Michelle, is currently being held in a secure location. If you don't accept my offer and leave peacefully, she'll share your daughter's fate. Jonathan felt the world narrow to a single point of crystal clarity. You're threatening my wife. I'm providing motivation for you to be reasonable. Where is she? Safe for now. But my patience has limits. Jonathan smiled, and something in that smile made the guards take a step back. So does mine. Mr. Hess, you're unarmed, outnumbered, and your wife's life hangs in the balance. What exactly do you think you can accomplish? I think I can finish what my daughter started. Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket, moving slowly to avoid alarming the guards. He withdrew a small device that looked like a garage door opener. What is that? Maxwell demanded. Insurance policy. You see, Mr. Garrison, while your people were searching me for weapons, they missed something important. I'm not here to kill you. Jonathan pressed the button. In the basement of the house, Raymax carefully placed explosives detonated simultaneously, cutting power to the estate and disabling the electronic security system. Emergency lighting flickered on, bathing the study in red shadows. I'm here to deliver you to the people who will. The study doors burst open. Federal agents in tactical gear flooded the room, automatic weapons aimed at the guards and Maxwell Garrison. Through the windows, Jonathan could see the estate surrounded by FBI vehicles, their spotlights turning night into day. Maxwell Garrison, you're under arrest, the lead agent announced. Federal charges of conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering, and murder. Maxwell stared at Jonathan in shock. This is impossible. You came here alone. I came here wired for sound and video. Everything you said about threatening my wife, about having people killed, about being above the law, it's all been recorded. The FBI has enough evidence to put you away for 10 lifetimes. As the agents handcuffed Maxwell Garrison, Jonathan felt Emma's presence beside him, her voice whispering that justice had finally been served. Where is my wife? Jonathan asked the lead agent. Safe at the FBI field office. We've had her in protective custody since yesterday, when your partner Mr. Baker informed us of the threat. Maxwell Garrison was led away in chains, his empire of corruption finally destroyed. As Jonathan walked out of the mansion, he saw Tyrone waiting by a black SUV. How do you feel? Tyrone asked. Jonathan looked back at the house where 3 generations of criminals had lived in luxury while their victims suffered. I feel like Emma can rest now. And you? Can you rest? Jonathan thought about his daughter, about her dreams of becoming a journalist, about her belief that truth and justice would always prevail if people had the courage to fight for them. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think I can." Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 6 months later, Jonathan stood in a courthouse in the state capital, watching as Maxwell Garrison was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The old man, diminished by his fall from power, showed no emotion as the judge read his fate. Gregory and Marcus Garrison had already been sentenced to 35 years each. Chief Barry Richards received 15 years for his role in the cover-up. The entire network of corruption that had controlled Millbrook County for decades had been dismantled, its architects spending their remaining years behind bars. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Jonathan and Michelle, seeking one final comment on the case that had captured national attention. "Mr. Hess, how do you feel now that your daughter's killers have been brought to justice?" Jonathan looked at the cameras, thinking about Emma's dreams of being on the other side of these interviews. "I feel grateful that the truth finally came out." Emma believed that journalism could change the world, that exposing corruption could make communities safer. Her death proved she was right. "Will you and your wife be returning to Millbrook County?" "No," Michelle answered. "Too many memories there. We're starting over somewhere new." They had sold the house, the business, everything that tied them to their former life. The money from Maxwell Garrison's seized assets, officially a whistleblower reward for exposing the corruption, would allow them to build a new life wherever they chose. That evening, they drove to the cemetery where Emma was buried. Her headstone now included a new inscription. "Her truth set a county free." "I've been thinking about what you said," Michelle told Jonathan as they stood beside their daughter's grave. "About Emma wanting to write this story herself." "What about it? Maybe someone should write it. The real story, not just the newspaper version. How a small-town corruption scandal grew into something that brought down an entire criminal empire." Jonathan considered this. "Who would write it?" "You. You lived it. You planned it. You saw it through to the end. And Emma always said you were a good storyteller." "I build furniture, Michigan. I don't write books." "You built something more complex than furniture. You built a trap that caught people who thought they were untouchable. You can learn to build stories too." As they drove away from the cemetery for the last time, Jonathan found himself thinking about narrative structure, about how to tell the story of a father's quest for justice in a way that would honor his daughter's memory. 3 years later, Blood and Justice, A Father's Reckoning became a best-selling account of the Millbrook County scandal. Jonathan had dedicated it to Emma, who taught me that the truth is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The book tour took him across the country, speaking to audiences about corruption, justice, and the importance of ordinary citizens standing up to power. At each stop, he carried a photo of Emma, ensuring that people remembered why the story mattered. During a signing in Denver, a young woman approached his table. She was about Emma's age, with the same intelligent eyes and determined expression. "Mr. Hess, I'm a journalism student at the University of Colorado. Your daughter's story inspired me to focus on investigative reporting." "She would have liked that," Jonathan replied, signing her book. "I'm working on a piece about municipal corruption in my hometown. Your book gave me ideas about how to approach the investigation safely." Jonathan looked up from the book. "Be careful. Powerful people don't like being exposed." "I know. But like Emma, I believe the truth is worth the risk." As the young woman walked away, Jonathan felt a familiar presence beside him. Emma's voice, carried on the memory of a spring evening when she'd told him about her dreams of changing the world through journalism. She had changed the world, just not in the way she'd planned. Her death had exposed a criminal conspiracy, freed a community from decades of corruption, and inspired a new generation of journalists to seek truth regardless of consequences. That night, in his hotel room, Jonathan called Michelle. They were living in Oregon now, in a small coastal town where he had opened a new furniture shop and she worked at the local library. It was a quiet life, peaceful in a way their old life had never been. "How was the signing?" she asked. "Good. Met a young journalist who reminded me of Emma." "They all remind you of Emma. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Emma's real legacy isn't the corruption she exposed, but the example she set. The idea that young people can take on powerful interests and win. I think she'd be proud of that legacy." "I think so too." After hanging up, Jonathan stood on his hotel balcony, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere in that sprawl of buildings and people, Corruption was probably taking root. Somewhere, powerful people were exploiting their positions for personal gain, confident that no one would have the courage to stop them. But also somewhere in those buildings, young journalists were learning their craft, inspired by stories like Emma's to seek truth and expose wrongdoing. The next generation of Emma Hesses was being trained, equipped with the knowledge that ordinary people could defeat extraordinary corruption if they had the courage to try. Jonathan had spent 3 years telling Emma's story, ensuring that her death had meaning beyond the criminals it exposed. Now it was time to return to his quiet life, to the wife who had stood by him through everything, to the simple satisfaction of creating beautiful things with his hands. But he would continue to carry Emma's memory, her belief in justice, her faith that truth would ultimately prevail. And if corruption ever again threatened innocent people, if powerful men again thought they could escape consequences for their crimes, Jonathan Hess would be ready to remind them that some fathers never stop fighting for their children. In Millbrook County, a new police chief had been elected, city contracts were awarded through transparent bidding processes, and a scholarship fund in Emma Hess's name supported aspiring journalists at the local community college. The town had been reborn, cleansed of the corruption that had infected it for decades. Carlton Garrison's grave was unmarked, visited by no one. Gregory and Marcus Garrison would die in prison, their names synonymous with the corruption they had embodied. Maxwell Garrison, the patriarch who had built a criminal empire, spent his final years in solitary confinement, his legacy reduced to cautionary tales told in law enforcement academies. But Emma Catherine Hess was remembered differently. Schools taught about her courage in pursuing truth despite danger. Journalism programs studied her research methods. Citizens groups invoked her name when challenging local corruption. She had become what she'd always dreamed of being, a journalist whose work changed the world. And in his workshop in Oregon, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and the satisfaction of honest work, Jonathan Hess continued building things meant to last. Tables and chairs that would serve families for generations, crafted with the same precision and dedication he had brought to his quest for justice. Emma was at rest. The truth had prevailed. Justice had been served. And Jonathan Hess, the father who had refused to let his daughter's death be in vain, had finally found peace. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.